Section 1. Imagine the worst possible thing that could happen to Rick Grimes and his survivors. Not another herd of walkers, not a governor with a tank and a grudge, not even a barbed-wire baseball bat swinging through the firelight. No. Imagine something that doesn't bleed out, something that can't be negotiated with, reasoned with, or outlasted, something that has already survived the apocalypse once and found it disappointing. Imagine Alex Mercer deciding that the world of the Walking Dead isn't a wasteland to survive, it's a resource to consume. Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going all in on one of the most terrifying crossover scenarios I have ever had the pleasure of thinking through at 3 in the morning when I should absolutely have been sleeping. We are asking a single, beautifully horrifying question. What happens when Alex Mercer, the prototype himself, the apex predator of the blacklight virus, steps through the door into Rick Grimes' world and decides, methodically, patiently, intelligently, that he wants it all? This isn't just a who would win in a fight video. We've all seen those. This is a full strategic breakdown, a contingency plan. Phase by phase, decision by decision, we are going to walk through how Mercer would approach, infiltrate, destabilize, and ultimately dominate an entire survivor ecosystem built around one of the most resilient human beings in post-apocalyptic fiction. And we are going to explore how Rick's group might, just might, push back. So grab whatever passes for coffee in whatever apocalypse you are currently surviving, because this one is going to be a long, dark, magnificent ride. Section 2. Let's start with our two players, because understanding them is everything. Alex Mercer is not a superhero. Let's be very clear about that from the start, because if you go in thinking of him as just a guy with superpowers, you are going to fundamentally misunderstand the threat he represents. Alex Mercer is a consumed identity. The original Alex Mercer, the virologist, the brilliant, morally bankrupt scientist who worked for Gentech, died in Penn Station. What walked out of that body bag was the blacklight virus wearing a human face, using human memories, and slowly, horrifyingly, deciding it preferred having a face to not having one. What this means in practical terms is staggering. Mercer can absorb biomass. He can consume a person, physically, completely, and in doing so inherit their appearance, their memories, their muscle memory, their voice patterns, their emotional responses. To anyone who knew that person, he is that person. There is no tell. There is no nervous tick. There is no uncanny valley moment where something seems off. He is a perfect biological forgery backed by the actual experiential data of the original. Beyond that, the physical capabilities are almost absurd to list out loud. Regeneration that borders on instantaneous for moderate damage, strength that lets him throw military vehicles, speed that makes trained soldiers look like they are standing still, the ability to reshape his body at a cellular level, armor plating his skin, extending his arms into bladed weapons, forming a shield of hardened biomass, sprouting tentacles from his back, or simply looking like anyone he has ever absorbed. He can glide, he can scale vertical surfaces with ease, he can survive falls from extreme heights, survive being submerged, survive explosions that would reduce a building to rubble. But here's what makes him genuinely dangerous in a way that pure physical power never could. He is intelligent. Not just intelligent, calculating. Mercer in the second game essentially turns into a cold, utilitarian logician who views the world through the lens of efficiency and control. He has no sentimentality about human life in the conventional sense. He understands it, he can simulate it, he can weaponize it, but he doesn't feel the weight of it. And yet he is not chaotic. He does not destroy for the pleasure of destruction. When he acts, there is a plan behind it, and the plan is always several moves ahead. His limitations are real, but they are not fatal, pun entirely intended. He needs biomass to sustain himself, particularly after major regeneration or exertion. In an environment already stripped of population density, that could theoretically become a constraint. He can be overwhelmed by sufficiently massive force, nuclear weapons, military-scale bombardment, things the Walking Dead world no longer has in meaningful quantities. And there is a psychological dimension worth noting. Those human memories he carries create something that functions, at moments, almost like conscience. He is not entirely free of the ghost of the man he replaced. Whether that is a weakness or a variable depends on the moment.
Section 3. Now let's talk about Rick Grimes. Rick is not superhuman. He is not augmented. He does not regenerate. He lost his hand at one point and just adapted. He is entirely, stubbornly, magnificently human in a world that keeps trying to kill him for it. And yet he has survived things that would have broken virtually anyone else. His survival is not luck, or at least not only luck. It is the product of an almost pathological adaptability, a willingness to do whatever the situation demands, regardless of what it costs him personally, and a capacity for leadership that borders on gravitational. People follow Rick Grimes not because he is always right, but because he makes them feel like survival is possible. His tactical instincts are excellent. He reads situations quickly, he improvises under pressure, and he has an almost predatory understanding of human psychology that he developed through years of law enforcement and sharpened through years of apocalypse. He knows how people break. He knows how they lie. He knows the difference between someone who is scared and someone who is dangerous, most of the time. His vulnerabilities are the mirror image of his strengths. He loves fiercely, and that love is exploitable. He trusts his own instincts, perhaps slightly too much, and when those instincts are fed false data, when the story he thinks he is reading is not the real story, he can be misdirected. He has also, across the course of his story, accumulated something that is both his greatest asset and his greatest liability: community. People depend on him. That dependency is a system of pressure points, and pressure points can be used. His group, at peak formation, is a genuinely formidable human network. Michonne, whose combat instincts and emotional intelligence make her one of the most dangerous people in the room in virtually any situation. Daryl, whose tracking, endurance, and survivalist capability are almost preternatural. A man who has lived his whole life being underestimated and knows exactly how to use that. Glenn, whose speed, navigation instincts, and loyalty make him indispensable in ways that go beyond his role as a runner. Maggie, whose evolution from frightened farmer's daughter to steel-spined leader happens across the course of their story and deserves far more credit than it often gets. Carol, who may be the single most underestimated member of the entire group, a woman who survived domestic abuse and an apocalypse by learning to become whatever the situation needed her to be, and who has on multiple occasions saved the group through what can only be described as cold, precise lethality when everyone else was paralyzed. These are not helpless civilians. These are people who have been forged by years of the worst possible conditions. They are a genuine challenge, which is exactly why Mercer would approach them with a plan. Section 4. Mercer does not walk into any situation without intelligence. This is foundational to how he operates. Before he makes a single aggressive move, before he reveals himself in any way, he spends time learning. And in the Walking Dead's world, learning is easier for him than for almost any other entity we could imagine inserting into that setting. The post-apocalyptic landscape is full of the dead, full of walkers. And walkers, to Mercer, are not threats. They are data sources. He can consume them, or at least interact with their biology in ways that give him information about how the local variant of the infection works, how it spreads, what it does to human tissue on a cellular level. Within a relatively short time of arriving in this world, he would have a comprehensive biological understanding of the walker infection that exceeds anything the survivors or even the remnants of the scientific community have managed to piece together. But that is just the beginning. The real intelligence he needs is social. He needs to understand the geography of the survivor networks, where they are, how they are structured, what their resource dependencies look like, what their internal tensions are, who holds what kind of authority, and crucially, who the weak links are, who is grieving, who is resentful, who feels overlooked, who is secretly afraid that the leader they follow has made one too many catastrophic decisions and might make another. He gathers this through absorption. He finds isolated individuals, scouts, runners, people who have separated from the main group for whatever reason, and he consumes them. Not dramatically, not violently in any visible sense. He is patient. He waits for the right moment, the moment when there are no witnesses and no immediate consequences. And then the person is simply gone, and Mercer knows everything they knew, every conversation they were part of, every argument they overheard through a thin wall in the dead of night, every secret they were keeping, every debt of loyalty or resentment they carried. In a survivor community, individual people carry enormous amounts of social intelligence simply by existing within it. A runner who has made supply runs for months knows the routes, the dangers, the resource caches, the relationships between the people who assign the runs and the people who go on them. A guard who has stood watch at the perimeter for weeks has overheard arguments, has noticed patterns of movement, has observed who goes where at what time and in what emotional state. Consume enough of these people, carefully, selectively, without triggering alarm, and you have a near-complete map of a community's internal life. Mercer would also spend this phase studying Rick specifically, not yet approaching him, not yet engaging, just watching, learning the rhythm of his decision-making, understanding what Rick looks like when he is afraid versus when he is angry versus when he is uncertain, noting who Rick turns to for counsel and who he keeps at a distance, watching how Rick's body language changes when he feels the group is safe versus when some threat is present on the edge of his awareness. Rick is the keystone. Remove him incorrectly and the structure collapses in unpredictable ways. Remove him correctly and you inherit the structure. Mercer in this phase is learning how to remove him correctly. The duration of Phase 1 depends on how dense the survivor network is and how frequently people move between settlements. In a concentrated scenario, say a single fortified community like Alexandria or the prison, Mercer could probably complete meaningful reconnaissance within a few weeks. In a dispersed network with multiple interconnected communities, it might take longer. He is, notably, patient. Patience is easy when you don't age.
Section 5. Having absorbed enough individuals to understand the internal landscape of the community, Mercer now makes his entrance. Not as himself, that would be tactically incoherent. He enters as someone the community already trusts. This is where his ability becomes almost unfairly powerful in a social context. He has consumed people who were members of Rick's group or adjacent to it. He can become any one of them, and the performance will not be an imitation, it will be an inhabitation. He will remember that person's birthday. He will remember their mother's name. He will remember the argument they had with Glenn 3 weeks ago and the half apology that was exchanged the next morning. He will remember that specific laugh, that specific way of tilting the head when something isn't quite believed, that habit of chewing the left side of the mouth when anxious. Imagine him returning from what should have been a routine supply run. The real person is gone, absorbed somewhere in the ruins of a convenience store or an overpass, with no evidence left behind. Mercer walks back through the gate. The guards nod. Someone calls out a greeting. Mercer responds in exactly the right way, and the door closes behind him, and he is inside. What does he do with this position? Initially, almost nothing that is detectable. He observes. He confirms the intelligence he gathered remotely. He identifies the social architecture of the group with the precision of someone reading a blueprint. Who is central? Who is peripheral? Who is the real decision-maker in situations where Rick defers to others, where the emotional fault lines run? He makes himself reliably pleasant. He contributes. He performs the identity he has assumed with total commitment. He does not rush. But underneath that performance, he is also beginning the slower work. He is placing seeds of doubt. Not dramatically, not the cartoonish villain who whispers poison into unsuspecting ears. Mercer is too intelligent for that. He does it through the machinery of normal social interaction. A slight hesitation before agreeing with Rick's last call that leaves the person he is speaking to wondering if that was doubt they just saw. A question asked in a tone that sounds curious but plants a seed of uncertainty about someone else's motives. The careful, deniable introduction of the idea that maybe the group's current path is not as secure as they think it is. He is also, during this phase, beginning to build his own small network of leverage. He is looking for the person who is already unhappy enough that the right amount of validation and attention might tip them toward something. Every community has that person. In Rick's world, the turnover of that role is high because the apocalypse burns through human resilience at a terrifying rate. The person carrying guilt about something they did. The person who loved someone who is gone and quietly blames the leadership for it. The person who is brilliant at something and has never felt adequately recognized for it. Mercer finds them, and he is kind to them, and he listens to them, and he becomes, quietly, the person they feel most understood by. He is building infrastructure, human infrastructure, tools he may never need to use overtly, but that represent genuine options in the operational plan. He is also, very quietly, beginning to conduct small-scale biological experiments. The walking dead are everywhere. In absorbed form, he carries a comprehensive understanding of both the blacklight virus and the Walker infection. He is curious, analytically curious, not maliciously curious, though in this context the distinction matters very little. Mercer is curious about the relationship between the two systems. Can blacklight suppress Walker infection in a living host? Can elements of the Walker infection be made useful within a blacklight framework? Can he create something that behaves differently from either one in isolation? These experiments happen far from the community. They are quiet. They produce no visible results yet. But Mercer is nothing if not forward-thinking, and Phase 3 is already being prepared while Phase 2 is still being performed.
Now, imagine a moment, just a scene, because this story needs to breathe. It is late. The settlement has gone mostly quiet. Rick is sitting outside on the steps of what used to be someone's home, doing the thing he does when he can't sleep, running through everything, cataloging threats, reviewing decisions, holding up the weight of the group's safety against his own exhaustion, and trying to figure out where the balance is. Mercer, in his assumed identity, comfortable and credible, comes out and sits nearby. Not close enough to be intrusive, just there, present. Rick glances over. Couldn't sleep either? Never sleep well out here, Mercer says. Too quiet. And it's perfect, because the real person he's wearing said that once, months ago, to someone who is now dead, and the words carry authentic weight. Rick nods. He says something about the fence needing reinforcing on the east side. He says something about the supply run tomorrow. And Mercer listens and asks the exact right questions, and at no point does anything in Rick's considerable instinct for threat raise the alarm. That is the horror. That is specifically the horror. Rick, who has survived every threat imaginable, who has stared down every kind of human monster the apocalypse has produced, is sitting next to the most dangerous organism on the planet, and it registers as a quiet, easy conversation on a sleepless night. And Mercer, for just a fraction of a second, just a fraction, feels something that is almost like respect. The memories he carries include genuine admiration for this man. Not enough to stop, not nearly enough to stop, but enough to make the game more interesting. Section 7. Here is where things escalate and where the intersection of these two universes becomes genuinely unprecedented. The Walker infection is everywhere in this world. It is ambient, dormant in every living person until death activates it. The entire survivor community exists in a state of biological uncertainty, knowing that anyone who dies inside the walls is a potential threat unless they are immediately and appropriately dealt with. This creates a constant low-grade psychological pressure that is one of the defining stresses of life in the Walking Dead universe. Mercer understands this pressure, and he understands that it is a lever. His blacklight virus, in the context of this world, is not simply a different infection, it is a functionally superior one. Where the Walker infection is crude, a blunt biological instrument that produces slow, mindless reanimation, blacklight is architectural. It builds, it improves. It produces hosts that are stronger, faster, and more capable than they were before. The question Mercer has been working on during his quiet experiments is whether blacklight can be modified to mimic, at a surface level, the appearance of Walker infection, while actually doing something far more interesting. The answer, in the scenario we are exploring, is yes, with modifications. What Mercer develops during this phase is not a full blacklight strain. He is not looking to create an army of super soldiers, not yet. What he creates is something more subtle, a modified agent that can be introduced into the water supply or food chain of a settlement in trace amounts. Something that does not transform hosts dramatically, something that simply lowers the threshold, makes people slightly more susceptible to the kind of influence he exerts, slightly more prone to paranoia, to impulsive decision-making, to seeing threat in ambiguous social signals, the kind of small, barely perceptible behavioral shifts that could easily be attributed to stress, grief, or the ongoing trauma of simply existing in the apocalypse. This is deeply insidious because it is unfalsifiable from inside the community. If Carol becomes slightly more suspicious of Glenn, and Glenn responds with slightly more defensiveness, and that small friction grows over days into something that requires intervention, who can say that isn't just two people under enormous pressure beginning to crack? The apocalypse creates these fissures all the time without any outside assistance. Mercer is not trying to break the community with this, not yet. He is softening it. He is making it more pliable, more responsive to the next phase of pressure. He is turning down the temperature of the social bonds that hold the group together, and doing it so gradually that the change feels like the natural entropy of survival, rather than the result of any deliberate action. Meanwhile, he selects his first overt move with care. Not a direct confrontation, something that looks like a Walker incident but has been engineered. A small incursion, a controlled breach at a section of the perimeter that Mercer has deliberately compromised. Not enough to be catastrophic, just enough to create chaos, to cost the group something, and to happen at a moment that makes a specific person's judgment look questionable. That person is whoever Rick trusts most at this moment. That relationship is the structural load-bearing wall of the community. Weaken the foundation of that trust, and the whole architecture becomes less stable. The incursion happens. It is managed, barely. Someone is hurt. The aftermath involves the kind of argument that exhausted, scared, grieving people have when they need to assign blame to make the fear manageable. And Mercer, still in his assumed identity, stands in the background of that argument and does absolutely nothing except exist in a way that slightly amplifies the tension. A look here, a word there. Nothing that could ever be identified or proven as a contribution, just presence, carefully deployed. After the argument subsides, and it does because Rick is good at pulling things back from the edge, there is a fracture, hairline thin, invisible under normal examination, but there. Mercer files it away.
This would be the moment Darryl starts to notice something. Darryl Dixon is not an analytical thinker in the conventional sense. He does not sit down and reason through a threat the way Rick does, with explicit logic and verbal processing. He feels it. He has spent his entire life reading environments, reading animals, reading weather, reading people with the kind of embodied instinctual intelligence that cannot be fully articulated, but cannot be fully fooled either. He doesn't know what's wrong, he just knows that something is. He has noticed that the person Mercer is wearing seems slightly different than he remembers. Nothing specific, nothing he could point to and say, look, this is wrong. Just a quality in the eyes, maybe. A slight mismatch between the emotion a person's face is performing and the emotion their eyes suggest is underneath. Animals do this instinctively. Darryl has spent enough time with animals and enough time among people who were trying to hurt him to have absorbed that same instinct. He doesn't say anything to Rick yet. It's too vague. Rick would ask him what exactly is off, and Darryl wouldn't be able to answer, and Rick would nod and suggest they're all under stress. So Darryl watches. He watches quietly from the edges, in that way of his, the way that tends to get misunderstood for disinterest or detachment by people who don't know him. He is the variable Mercer has not fully accounted for. He knew Darryl's profile. He absorbed data about Darryl from the people he consumed. But data about Darryl Dixon and actually being watched by Darryl Dixon are two different experiences, and Mercer, who is used to being the most capable entity in any room, begins to very slightly recalibrate. Moving into Phase 4, Mercer has established himself inside the community, introduced low-grade biological destabilization, engineered one controlled crisis, and begun to erode the specific relationship Rick relies most on. Now he is looking for the person who is almost at breaking point. Not quite there, almost. The person whose grief or guilt or exhaustion has worn them down to the point where a single, well-placed conversation could tip them over into a place where they are willing to do something that serves his plan. He finds that person, and he has a conversation with them in the dead of night when no one else is around. Not as the character he has been performing, not with cruelty. He is honest with them, selectively honest, which is the most dangerous kind, and he tells them something they have been afraid to admit to themselves. He validates the part of them that is breaking. He suggests gently that the reason they feel this way is because the people around them have failed to see them clearly, that the leadership of this community has made choices that have cost real people real things, and those costs have never been adequately acknowledged. He does not ask them to do anything specific. He just plants the idea that maybe the current structure of things is not actually the only possible structure, that survival could look different, that maybe the person making all the decisions for everyone else does not automatically deserve that authority just because he has held it through terrible circumstances. This is the deepest knife Mercer carries, and it is not made of anything physical. It is made of the truth, partial truth, weaponized. The observation that power in Rick's group is not democratic, that Rick makes unilateral decisions that get people killed, and then the group grieves and continues. That there is a pattern there that, if you look at it from a different angle, resembles a man whose attachment to his own judgment is stronger than his attachment to the lives of the people he leads. Rick would hate this characterization. Most of the group would reject it, but in the person Mercer has chosen, the person already hovering at the edge of their own breaking, it lands differently. This is not a manipulation for its own sake. Mercer is building a second identity, a backup inside the community. Someone who will, at a key moment, hesitate when they should act, who will, when Mercer's plan enters its final phase, be somewhere other than where Rick needs them to be.
And then, having set all of this in motion, Mercer does something unexpected. He allows the person wearing his assumed identity to appear to be killed. A Walker incident, witnessed, mourned briefly because the apocalypse does not allow for extended mourning, and filed away as another loss in a long inventory of losses. Now, Mercer is free. He is no longer constrained by the identity he was performing. He can move through the environment as a ghost or as whoever he needs to be, shifting identities as circumstances require. He has absorbed enough people at this point to have several options. He uses this freedom to begin the final preparation.
Section 8. A contingency plan, by definition, is a response to the possibility that things do not go as intended. Mercer has been operating on a primary track: infiltrate, destabilize, leverage biological advantage, crack the social foundation. But he is not naive enough to believe that everything goes according to plan against Rick Grimes. The man has a talent for surviving things he shouldn't. So the contingency is this: if the psychological and social operations succeed, Mercer moves to assimilation. He offers the community a choice, not a kind choice, not a generous choice, but a real one. Because Mercer, for all his cold calculation, is not without his own peculiar logic about value. He does not destroy what he can use. The survivors, properly integrated into a black light-influenced ecosystem, a world where the dominant biological force is Mercer's virus rather than the Walker infection, could continue to function. They would not be the people they were, but they would be alive after a fashion, and they would be part of something larger. The contingency if the primary operations fail, if Rick figures it out, if Daryl's instincts break through before Mercer is ready, if the community coalesces around a threat it can identify, is force. Mercer, without the constraint of his assumed identity, is an open battlefield by himself. The community has weapons. They have numbers. What they do not have is anything that can actually kill him, short of catastrophic physical destruction. And catastrophic physical destruction requires either a military capability they do not possess, or an extremely specific and precise plan executed without error under extreme duress. But Mercer does not prefer this route. He prefers the plan, because the plan is elegant, and Mercer has, in the part of him that was once a scientist, an appreciation for elegance. It is Michonne who almost unravels it. Not Daryl, though Daryl is watching. Not Carol, though Carol is already alert to the shift in the community's emotional temperature in a way that she cannot yet articulate, but that her particular kind of intelligence registers as important. It is Michonne, because Michonne has spent enough time in this world understanding that the most dangerous things are not the ones that look dangerous. She has been reviewing the circumstances of the death that removed Mercer's assumed identity from the field. She is not satisfied with the official story, not because anything about it is technically wrong. It is detailed and internally consistent and supported by the physical evidence Mercer left behind. But there is a quality to it that she finds too clean. Mercer is meticulous. The apocalypse, in her experience, is not. She brings this to Rick. And here is the moment, the pivot, because Rick, who trusts Michonne's instincts the way a navigator trusts a compass, takes it seriously. He does not dismiss it. He asks the right questions. He starts, quietly and carefully, to look. What does Mercer do when the investigation begins? He watches it, from the outside now, from a distance, tracking its progress through a combination of observation and the leverage he has built inside the community. He watches Rick and Michonne work through the evidence together. Their partnership, their intellectual synchrony, the way they balance each other's thinking, and he feels something. Not fear, not respect exactly, though there is respect there. Something more specific. The recognition that these two, working together, are genuinely the most dangerous opposition this world has to offer him. Not because they can hurt him physically, because they might be smart enough to understand what they are actually dealing with before he is ready for them to understand it. He adjusts. He does not panic. He is constitutionally incapable of panic in any conventional sense, but he accelerates the timeline. The final phase, which he had intended to delay for another few weeks, is moved forward. The final phase begins at night, because of course it does. He reveals himself to Rick directly, not through proxy, not through layers of manipulation. He reveals himself because at this stage, the revelation itself is a move. It is the most destabilizing thing he can do. Rick has been building a picture of a threat that he still doesn't fully understand, and Mercer walking into the light and saying, quite simply, that he is the threat, all of the threat, the full scope of it, is a strategic detonation. Rick has a gun. Rick will always have a gun. He raises it. Mercer does not move. He does not need to. "I've absorbed 3 members of your group," he says, and his voice is entirely calm, the way a mathematician explains a proof, not because the mathematician is cold, but because the truth of the thing doesn't require emotional emphasis. "I know your patrol patterns, your supply caches, your contingency positions. I know what Daryl is going to do before he does it, because I know exactly how he thinks." He pauses. "I also know where your son is sleeping right now." The gun doesn't waver. Rick's hands are steady, but something moves in his eyes, something shifts, and Mercer sees it happen and knows he has landed it correctly. "I'm not here to destroy what you've built. I'm here because what you've built is the best available raw material." He lets that sit for a moment. "You've created something that survives. I intend to create something that dominates. The question is whether you want to be part of that, or whether you want to spend whatever time you have left trying to stop it." Rick says, "There's a third option." "There always is," Mercer says, and almost smiles. "That's actually why you're still interesting."
Section 9. What happens next? This is the part where honest analysis diverges from clean narrative resolution, and I want to give you all 3. In Outcome 1, Rick makes the play that Mercer does not fully anticipate. He doesn't try to fight Mercer, he runs, not away, toward. He activates every resource he has across every community in their network simultaneously. He has prepared for this moment not by planning a way to kill what is threatening him, but by building something that cannot be killed by targeting any individual piece of it, a network, a community of communities. He has always understood in his bones that the unit of survival is not the individual and not even the small group, but the larger web of human connection. And Mercer, for all his intelligence, has been studying Rick's specific community rather than the full extent of what Rick has built. He has not consumed members of the Allied settlements. He has not mapped those relationships. The war that follows is not one that Mercer wins quickly, because for the first time, he is not fighting isolated individuals or a single group, but a distributed human network that is reacting with the kind of adaptive, chaotic resilience that biological systems, including notably the blacklight virus itself, are ultimately designed to counter, but require time to address. Rick buys time, and in Rick's world, buying time is what everything is built on. It is not a victory exactly, but it is not the clean consumption Mercer planned. It is a conflict.
It is, perhaps for the first time since New York, something that makes Mercer genuinely uncertain of the outcome. In outcome 2, the biological destabilization Mercer introduced has done its work more thoroughly than even he expected. The community fractures at the critical moment. The person he turned, the one hovering at the breaking point, makes a choice that costs Rick the initiative at exactly the wrong moment. The final phase completes more or less as designed, and the survivor network begins its transition into something that is no longer recognizably Rick Grimes' world. Carol is the last one to stop fighting. Of course, it's Carol, because Carol has always been the one nobody accounts for, and she has spent her entire adult life learning to survive in impossible situations by becoming exactly as difficult to destroy as the situation requires. She does not stop because she is defeated. She stops because she is making a calculation, the same cold, precise calculation she has always made about when to absorb a loss and when to use it. And Mercer, who has absorbed the memories of everyone who knew her well enough to know what she is doing, allows it, because something in those memories has given him a grudging understanding that Caro, specifically, is not a resource to be consumed. She is a problem to be managed over a longer timeline. In outcome 3, Darrow finds the evidence first. Not the analytical evidence, the physical evidence. He tracks Mercer, actually tracks him the way he would track an animal, and what he finds in the ruins outside the settlement is the full scope of what has been happening, the experiments, the absorbed remains, all of it. He doesn't fully understand what he is looking at, but he understands enough, and he brings Rick in. What follows is a desperate, creative, and deeply human attempt to use the environment against something that the environment cannot conventionally harm. They cannot kill Mercer, but they can perhaps make this particular world not worth having. They can destroy what he came to use. Not themselves, they would never, but the resources, the supply lines, the things that make this network of communities a viable foundation for what Mercer is building. They make themselves a cost rather than an asset. They burn their own fields and scatter their own caches and disperse into small distributed units that are almost impossible to manage efficiently, and they wait. Mercer, standing in the aftermath of a plan that was executed flawlessly and still did not produce the result he wanted, considers this. He says, to no one, because there is no one left nearby who is running. That's new.
Section 10. The thing that makes this crossover scenario so compelling, and the thing I keep coming back to every time I think it through, is that it is fundamentally a story about two different philosophies of power. Alex Mercer's philosophy is biological. It is the logic of the virus. Consume, adapt, expand. Everything that exists is either a resource or an obstacle, and the difference between those two categories is just a question of approach. He is not cruel, he is efficient. And in a world already broken by death, his efficiency has a kind of terrible coherence. Rick Grimes' philosophy is relational. It is the logic of the community. Hold on to each other. Build something that is worth the cost of building it. Make meaning out of survival by surviving for each other rather than just surviving. It is messier than Mercer's philosophy. It is slower, less efficient, more prone to failure at individual points. But it is also, and this is what makes it dangerous to Mercer specifically, self-reinforcing in a way that biological power is not. Every time it survives, it becomes more convinced of its own value. Every loss that does not break it makes it more certain that it cannot be broken. Mercer can consume Rick Grimes the person. What he cannot easily consume is the idea that Rick Grimes has spent years installing in the people around him.
That idea is distributed. It is not located in any single body or any single place. It lives in the way Carol makes decisions, in the way Daryl tracks a threat, in the way Michonne reads a room, in the way Maggie leads when Rick is not present. It is, in a strange way, more viral than Mercer. That is what makes this story worth telling. So here is the question I want to leave you with, because this is ultimately a story about two kinds of survival, and I think it is worth sitting with. In a world already stripped of almost everything, where the dead walk and the living cling to each other across the ruins of civilization, which is the more dangerous thing? The power that consumes everything it touches, or the idea that some things are worth refusing to let go of? Is Alex Mercer's world better than Rick Grimes in any sense of the word better? Is efficiency in survival the same as a reason to survive? Or does Rick's chaotic, human, costly, magnificent refusal to reduce people to resources represent something that even a being made entirely of adaptive biology cannot ultimately answer? Let me know what you think in the comments. I want to know which outcome you think is most likely. I want to know who you think the wild card is. I have my own answer, and I'm betting it's the same as yours, but I want to hear it. And I want to know, if you were in Rick's group and you knew what Mercer was, what would you do? Because that question right there is the one the apocalypse always asks. Not what would survive, what would you do? I'll see you in the next one.